Welcome. It's Karen Sparks with Movement, Art, and Soul, and I'm a counselor, an artist, and a movement artist. This channel is about wholeness, integration, enlightenment, individuation. It's about your personal spiritual journey towards wholeness, healing, words like that. And today's topic is going to be around narcissism once again. And what I want to talk about is an idea around narcissism, how you can get pulled into a relationship with a narcissist, what are those dynamics like, and some terminology around when people call people that support the narcissist flying monkeys, what's that about, and the scapegoat. So I just wanted to go into dynamics. I told you I was going to be doing a playlist on it, but I have a lot of different things that I want to share with you. And so when you revisit the channel over time, then you'll see that I go back and forth to these different playlists, but you can always drop me a line. You can always put in a comment and say, hey, could you get to this video, or could you do that? And I'd be happy to, take a look at that and see what is coming up and then put that into my agenda. So in my first video on this, I did talk about the narcissist and gave a little bit of an explanation around that. So I just want to go in a little bit deeper today and talk about some dynamics about things. And one of them is that a narcissist needs someone to project upon certain things like a lack of responsibility. And if you think about it, there is a certain kind of lock and key phenomenon that I talk about, which I learned, it's like 30 years ago. It's a lock and key phenomena, and I could have definitely see that in my own life. As I learn more and more about myself and my own dynamics, I can reflect on my relationships, and that is very helpful to me in my journey and on my path myself. So one thing I can suggest is if you're looking at this because you imagine that you might be a narcissist and you're trying to work on yourself, or that you're a scapegoat and in a relationship with a narcissist, then I suggest that inner reflection is huge. It just doesn't matter what we're looking at. Inner self-reflection is one of the biggest tools that I have used in my life that has helped me to grow and to overcome many different things along my own personal journey. Without the self-reflection, it's very difficult to shift things. And so in a dynamic with a scapegoat and a narcissist, it is the narcissist that has the characteristics of finding it very difficult to self-reflect and take personal responsibility. This is why you will find this all over the internet, with this being such a huge topic these days, that one of the major key points of a narcissist is the fact that they don't see what they're doing, take responsibility. And so, again, in order for a person like a narcissist on a various level of degrees of narcissism, and speaking of it in general terms and not, as I said in my first video, something that is a diagnosis that you can get diagnosed by a psychiatrist or a psychologist. Okay, so we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how, generally speaking, there's a big thing going on where this dynamic is becoming noticed in the general public, and so we're talking about it more. So I look at it like an energy dynamic. Therefore, what I'm trying to say is that let's say, because we know we've talked about these things in society a great deal, and that is that, let's say there is an addicted person. They can be addicted to whatever kind of thing it may be, because addictions these days, and in my own personal training that I learned, we tend to think more like alcohol, drugs, street drugs, or prescription drugs, things like that. But addictions can come in so many ways, including tech and all kinds of other avoidance strategies. That we'll get into a playlist around addiction, because it's quite a topic of in-depth studies. So but to use it as an example, if someone struggles with addiction, most often they hook up with a certain type of person, and so it becomes like a lock and key. And this dynamic plays out until either the person that is in a relationship with someone who's addicted, they may be addicted themselves, but maybe not to the same degree. So it could be that, let's say, just to clarify it, let's say there's someone with a workaholism addiction. They might be attracted to someone who's more of a caretaker or a codependent personality type with a certain type of attachment. They would have different attachment styles to one another, but that's a whole different topic in itself too. But the key is that they have this attraction, because in order for them to play out their drama, they need to be in close relationship with someone that enables that drama, that personal, internal set of behaviors, characteristics, and so on to continue. So if we look at a narcissistic relationship, narcissists tend to attract scapegoats. And that dynamic will work because when we look more deeply, and of course these are just general labels again, when we look more deeply into that dynamic, what is happening is a scapegoat tends to take more responsibility and often will say sorry when you push them to say, well, what exactly are you sorry for in that situation? Sometimes they might say, oh, well, I don't know, maybe I was too judgmental, maybe I just took it too personally or something like that. But when you get to really look at what's going on, eventually you might find that there's nothing for them to be sorry for in that particular dynamic or exchange, because a narcissist, as I was saying, tends to not take responsibility for certain things they're doing, and they do specific types of behaviors like gaslighting, where they don't own up to what they're doing, and so they do a lot of projecting, like, no, you're doing that, or no, you're the actual one who's this way and this way and this way. So sometimes there's a lot of projection going on, and then they might even say, oh, well, you're projecting. So there's all these little subtle dynamics, and a scapegoat tends to have a history of coming from a place where they have that self-doubt because they've been scapegoated before. So I know I've mentioned that it's really important to look at your family history. Looking at your family history gives you information about what kind of patterns you've been set up to play out in your relationships, whether those relationships are with teachers, with coworkers, but especially with your significant closest relationships. So we learn a pattern and we're set up to play that pattern out quite well because we're easily conditioned from a very young age, and then it just becomes a pattern. And our at least in my perspective, our job in this lifetime is to come more clear within ourselves about our history so that we can evolve, so that we can get past these drama patterns and have healthier relationships with ourselves, our life, our relationships, and so on. And so the thing to do if you're questioning, am I in a relationship with a narcissist? Am I a scapegoat? It's just to look at what sort of things can you see happening. I tell people to be a detective. I use that word in many different things because a part of self-reflection becomes you have to really be sure. Detectives have to be sure. They have to get the facts right. They have to dig in deep. They have to figure the whole thing out. They can't just make a blind statement and say, oh yeah, this is what happened. No, they have to get it right. So when I say be a detective, one of the things that's helped me in my life to overcome certain types of patterns, and I've had different patterns as I've moved along, and then another layer of unfolding and evolving comes forward in my life and I have to look at something new, is this whole idea around being my own detective and self-reflecting, but to get it right, to get the facts right. So I don't want to just make an assumption and I don't want to just judge things like that. I want to remember what happened in that specific situation. I want to remember who said what. I want to remember how did this actually start? Because one of the things within a relationship with a narcissist is many of them are quite charming and quite witty and very good at turning the tables around. And I talked about that in my last video. So it's actually helping you. If you want to take the perspective, take it away from the anger, which of course it's very frustrating and it can be anger provoking to be in a dynamic like that quite a bit. But if you can take that and shift that into curiosity and say, okay, then this is really important for me. I need to see what's going on here for real and become more aware, more conscious in the moment. Because what it is you can be a very conscious individual But in a relationship, a lot of unconscious material gets triggered. And so you may find that, oh no, okay, I know something doesn't feel right. I know that I'm really not all to blame here, but why is it that I feel like it's all my fault? It's because many times narcissists, being so charming and witty and able to turn the tables out of their own deep fear of being responsible, of taking ownership. It's like they have an inflated image of themselves, that is their way of coping. And they have a history of needing to feel that way, but that's their way of coping. And so that's why they need you, because if you're listening to this as a scapegoat and not a narcissist. If you're listening to this as a scapegoat, then they need you, because in order for that dynamic to play out so that their inflated self-image is able to be sustained, so they don't have to do their own work because it's so painful to see these things for them. There's a lot of shame and stuff involved around their dynamic. They need you to be the scapegoat. They need you to be the projected pad of their projections. They need you to be that screen. And oftentimes what you may find is, again, that you absorb those things before you have an opportunity to see the dynamic. And once you see the dynamic is in play, it can often be a very difficult thing to get out of as well. And I understand this dynamic because of a scapegoat history type energy drama pattern of my own. And it's even though I could see what was going on in my particular situation and situations, I should say, I could see it happening. I really had this belief that I needed to keep trying harder, because I do believe that we all have aspects and patterns within ourselves that we can shift, and that none of us are perfect. And I took that kind of a belief to an extreme. So for me, I needed to realize, oh, okay, that is in fact true, but you don't need to tolerate this anymore, because these types of dynamics are actually hurting you because you're taking things on that aren't about you. So we need to get clear. And that's what happened to me, is I needed to get more clear. What's about me? Okay, I can work on that. What's about this person or people? Because sometimes when we're scapegoats, then we'll attract that kind of energy pattern. Remember, it's a pattern. It's a drama pattern. It's a pattern of relating that we're used to. And so I had to come to see that what was happening, and it just brought so much more awareness. And once I got that part of it and could see the triggering that I had, which would create an unconsciousness, and so I would imagine that everything was actually true, that I needed to work harder, that it was me after all, and so I would say sorry when I didn't really need to say sorry. And those are the kinds of things to look at for yourself. Right? You need to become clear. When I became clear, it still took time, because after that, there were all kinds of other things that came up for me. It can be difficult when you're entrenched in a dynamic with a narcissist. It can be difficult to release oneself because of a lot of other things that can come into play, even once you're aware and you know that that's what's going on. And so that's where our work is. And if you're a narcissist, then your work is in coming to see that that's what you're doing, because it's difficult for you. It's difficult for you to look in the mirror realistically, to see realistically how you really are, what you're doing, what you're saying, what is your energy around other people, particularly people closest to you. And see, this is another thing too, because narcissists can often be one way out in a different arena with other people, and a completely different way with their partner, or with somebody at work, or with a family member. Okay, that is the history of what I experienced. So the narcissists that I came across in different dynamics in my life were charming, and people liked them. And then, when you get used to having things put onto you all the time as a scapegoat, it's almost like being a sin eater too. You take the sins of all this stuff because everybody's projecting on you. You're like a projection screen, right? And you start swallowing that stuff and realizing, not only am I swallowing my own stuff that I'm saying sorry for, I'm now saying sorry for everybody else's stuff too, because when I bring it up, they don't want to hear it. right? And then so it kind of bounces back onto you all the time as a scapegoat. But if you're a narcissist and you're wanting to grow and you're listening to this because you're actually saying, well, you know what, I'm starting to see that my relationships aren't working out and I've got this pattern, then the first thing to do is to listen to the characteristics of a narcissist. And if you've been told that, or if your partner's saying certain things to you and you can hear that and you say, oh, you know what? Actually, I do see that, and I do see this pattern in my family when I was growing up. I kind of get that, and I want to shift that. Well, if you want to shift that and have better relationships, what you need to do is take responsibility for your own stuff. You don't need to take other people's stuff on. You need to take your own on, because you got to realize that when you're in a relationship with a scapegoat, they've got their own stuff too, but they're taking yours on too, because you're not owning it. You're not owning it. So not only do they have to own their own stuff, which you're more than happy to bring to their attention, they're now trying to swallow and eat and transform all the stuff that you're projecting onto them as well. That can be quite difficult. It's a really difficult dynamic, but it does happen. And we have lots of other dynamics, of course, out there. And so that's the important thing to think about. So scapegoats and narcissists have this lock and key kind of phenomena, and we have an uncanny way of continuing to bring energies and patterns into our life until we can break them. And once I broke my pattern, I found that it did assist me in my own personal spiritual journey, because I'm already quite conscious and aware, and I was, but of course, I had patterns that I still had to break, and I will go deeper into my work and see other things I need to uncover and work through as well as I move along. But it does assist us in really growing, and there's gifts that come with that. So if you are a narcissist and you're listening to this, and I know it's difficult for you, because you're not used to taking responsibility. So in a way, a scapegoat, when I was taught in one teaching was that there are people that suffer with more self-importance, and there's people that suffer with a little bit more self-pity or self-doubt. And the ones that fall into the self-pity a little bit more, it's easier for them because the only way is up. They already take so much stuff on. They're so used to that. The only way for them is up. But if you're suffering from self-importance, it's very difficult to come down, because you got yourself put up here, because that is a defense mechanism too. And if you take a look at your history, there was a reason for you doing that. And so it's not that it's any better. It's difficult to be both, but it's more difficult if you're not used to taking responsibility to then do so. And it's so important. So I want to talk a little bit about, it's difficult for both. I want to talk a little bit about that we ought to not point the finger. We ought to self-reflect. So separate what's about you, what's not about you. It can be equally as difficult to rise up from taking everything on and feeling so much self-doubt, not believing in yourself, being gaslighted, attracting narcissists, and feeling all these different things that you can experience as a scapegoat. So many people can relate to these things. And it can be equally difficult, if not harder, to begin to take responsibility when you're used to dumping it on others, or just not even feeling the need to at all. So it's hard to see it, but it's so important to do so. I wanted to mention the flying monkeys as well. So flying monkeys, this is the other dynamic that makes it very difficult, which is why scapegoats often feel isolated, or they feel a higher amount of self-doubt than maybe some other characteristics in narcissism. I think some narcissists may feel some self-doubt, but it's because they do suffer from low self-worth and from shame and different things like that, which is why they don't want to take responsibility, because it's so painful for them in many cases, right? But I wanted to mention the flying monkeys, and that is that when people are around a narcissist, let's take it back to a family because of how this begins. When there is a very strong narcissistic individual in a family, that person tends to have the other people around them agreeing with what they say, because they can be quite Overpowering is a good word, which can come across in many different forms of behavior, but overpowering is a good word. So it's like they overpower the environment, and so others want to align with them, because in a family, ultimately most people want harmony. Ultimately most people don't want dissolution. Ultimately most people want congruency, getting along, fitting in, being accepted, feeling loved. Okay, so a narcissist will often have a lot of people around him or her which agree with them. And to not agree creates so much of an issue, so much of a problem, that the flying monkeys are the ones that tend to be a little bit more weaker minded. They don't tend to stand up for things, and they don't speak up, and they tend more to agree, even if they get angry themselves and tend to have arguments or whatever once in a while. It's that they align themselves with the narcissist. So a scapegoat in a dynamic like that would be the one that sees what's going on and just feels they have to speak up. You know, we have these different dynamics in families, and often when there's something missing, somebody tends to fill that spot. And if someone has an awareness and they feel and they're reflective, they may begin to notice this is not healthy, and they might want to speak up. I don't feel it was right that so-and-so said this. I don't feel that this situation should have been handled in this way. Why is it that when this goes on, you say this and this? That's quite rude. That's ignorant, or that's mean, or, you know, your tone of voice is really hostile. Why are you always so, and then you don't admit it? Why won't you just say what you're really experiencing instead of being in denial because your behavior is so irritable and this and that, but you're not owning that? Whatever the case might be. Okay, so what would happen then is a narcissist, or the flying monkeys that align themselves with the narcissist, because that creates harmony, or an illusion of harmony for them. People begin to project onto the scapegoat that this is the person who's creating a problem. Why do you always have to rock the boat? Why do you always have to create a problem? Why is it you always have to say something? We all get along just fine. Now that's one I've heard before more than once. We all get along just fine. So it's a really interesting comment to make, because, you know, in generally speaking, when there is harmony, when something good is going on and a troublemaker comes along, that is a possibility. As a teacher, I've seen that in groups. I've seen that sometimes somebody comes in who disrupts a harmonious group, who is the one that has the issue. So it's a very interesting statement to make, because when there's a dysfunctional unit and there are dysfunctional things going on, and there is a narcissist with people that align with the narcissist, now what we have is a toxic, dysfunctional, unhealthy dynamic in a group, and someone healthier is coming in. And because we see both types of scenarios as possible, a harmonious, healthy, functional group with a troublemaker coming in and just trying to stir the pot, or a dysfunctional system in which a healthy person is a part of that wants to, create a shift, a change, or to see, just to maybe even stand up for themselves. It can be quite challenging for a scapegoat who's always used to hearing that they're the problem. So when this begins, so when they're born into a situation like this, and this is what they're hearing from a very young age, eventually it can wear them down, and they begin to think, oh, I am the problem. And maybe they begin to adopt certain behaviors, and this becomes an unconscious pattern for them. They may begin to feel like maybe there is something wrong with me. Many scapegoats can identify with this, and as a counselor, I have heard so many situations. Like, most of the time, as I've told you before, most things I help people with are relationships, family, personal feelings of just, I would say, unhappiness in their life situation, things like that. And it has to do with dynamics of this sort. And so this always points to where we can go and do our personal work. Because in order to get to the place of wholeness, this work needs to be identified. On a spiritual level, just to take this a little deeper, when we're in a dynamic like that, we can begin to shift the energy patterns on an energetic level, and then it denses down into the physical. So this is why people can start to experience stress, great deals of stress, which can cause different problems in the body, inflammation, acidity, different kinds of tensions, and then can lead to other problems. So it's really a big deal. There is a wonderful doctor that I was talking with about inflammation, chronic inflammation in the body, and various different illnesses that can result from that. And he said, there are so many things that we talk about, like exercise and diet and everything. And he said, stress is one that I feel overpowers that. You can eat well and you can exercise, but if you have high amounts of stress due to disharmony in relationships or some kind of life situation that you're not addressing, it's going to overpower the other two that you could be doing just fine. And so I relate that to the spiritual path. When we are on a spiritual path and we are doing our work and there is something we need to address, we're going to have to face that eventually, because there'll come a point where we realize that we can't go further until we do. And so see how this always all relates. It all relates back to the same thing. And this dynamic is very popular today because I think, there's so much talk about bullying, right? A narcissist is a bully type energy in a dynamic, in a drama pattern, relationship pattern. I call them drama patterns because it's very dramatic, right? So it's quite a dramatic situation when you think about how it looks. They are a bully. There's a lot of talk about bullying in schools. As a counselor, I've heard that a lot from kids in school and adults in the workplace coming to talk to me about things like that. And so we ask ourselves, when we're in a dynamic with someone like that, it gives us information about ourselves. Okay, so if you are the bully and you're looking to change, then looking at yourself is difficult, just as it's difficult to look at yourself and realize, why am I attracting bullying patterns into my life? So it's both difficult for both parties in different ways. And that's where we need to look at. We need to look within. And so when people would come to me in school, and I have experience with this myself, so I do know what it feels like. But it doesn't matter because we have all kinds of dynamics. If you're either a bully or you're someone that has put up with that, or you've overcome these things and they're no longer an issue for you. So it's always information. There's always something we learn about ourselves when we reflect and notice the type of drama patterns that we can see in our relationships and how harmonious we feel our relationships are. How compatible do we feel? How satisfied do we feel in the relationships that we're in? Compatibility is another issue. Once we can identify a pattern, let's say you are in a relationship with a narcissist and you are a scapegoat and you start to reflect back and you unravel your family pattern, or you're a narcissist and you unravel how you identified with narcissistic behavior and therefore became one yourself, looking at the dynamic you grew up with. There was probably a very powerful narcissist that you identified with. And when we identify with that person, that is our survival tactic. Just like a scapegoat becomes a scapegoat because they see things and they speak up, and that becomes their pattern. And it depends how they handle the response that they get when they speak up. Okay, so for a narcissist, they need to come to see that. It's all about exploring that history, coming into the current. So kind of looking like after the family and looking into relationships we've been in, looking into our current relationship and identifying patterns and asking ourselves, now, how compatible are we in the relationship that we're in now that we've broken a pattern? Because we may find that, okay, I've broken the pattern, but I can no longer relate with this person anymore because it's a dynamic that wants to stay the same, and I'm no longer not even agreement because it's unconscious, right? I'm no longer able to do that because I'm conscious of what is going on a deeper level, and also have the ability to just not do that anymore. So the first step is being conscious, and as I said, not only in my own example, but in people I speak with about these types of situations in their life, when they say, oh yeah, I definitely can see that this is going on, I just am having a difficult time shifting that. So it's all about like the different level that we are at, and how we move through this. And when we come to a place where we are no longer doing the pattern, now we can create something new. Now we can evolve and grow. And that's where we need to hold the awareness and the consciousness that, okay, so this is a pattern I'm seeing, and it can be layers of patterns that we uncover as we go through life. And so our relationships may shift. You know, if we can grow with someone, that's great. And if we can no longer grow with a person, and we're in a situation where we need to move forward, in order to move forward, that's requiring new dynamics. So you can either do that with your current partner if you're with a partner, or you may find that you need to move forward and move away from that person and explore new relationships. And so the flying monkeys are people that can eventually later in life become narcissists or scapegoats, or be the kind of people that hang around narcissists and just are in agreement in a group to support that kind of behavior in order to feel that they fit in, and it can be quite bullying. So people talk to me about family dynamics where they stick together and becomes like a bullying behavior. The flying monkeys support the narcissist by belittling, putting down, and in different types of, whether it's even subtle or covert, bullying tactics onto different scapegoats around them in their lives. So if you've seen any of these dynamics in your life, I'm just asking you to explore them, explore the dynamics. And even if you're just listening to this because you've clicked on it and you've made it this far, then I would say, why'd you click on it? Were you just interested? Did you just want to hear this perspective? There's a lot of talk about that in the general YouTube channeling out there. And I find that that's the case because of the fact that it is so common and so many people can relate to it. And they're saying, yes, I see this in my family. So I would ask you, if you've made it this far, what made you listen this far? Do you feel that there's something in here that speaks to you, even if it's just the whole idea around self-reflection and patterns? If these patterns don't speak to you, what sort of pattern might you find yourself in? And begin to take your next step, because as I mentioned before, it does happen in layers. Many years ago, I overcame a certain pattern that I had of things I was attracting when I was much younger. And that took me time, so I became aware of it. But again, I became aware of it. I was conscious. I was aware of observing it, but I found it challenging to shift out of. And once I did, I just didn't go back to those types of patterns. And so then I came across a different kind of pattern, and I went into that, and then I broke that pattern. And we can learn many different things about ourselves, and that helps us to evolve. So I hope that brings you some light along your personal spiritual journey, and that whatever it is that you're working on and you want to shift in your life, that brings you to a place in your life where you are more aligned, and that it brings you more energy, more life, more vitality, more satisfaction in your ability to create the kind of life that you like. Until next time, if you know anybody that could use this information, you think it might be helpful for them, please pass it on to them, and like and subscribe.